You too.
Hope everybody's doing well, and let's get started. I clicked on the wrong thing, and then in the process unclicked the Pirkei Avot. So we're going to share this screen here, and you'll bear with me as I bring it up again. So we are in Pirkei Avos, which is found in Nezikin, dealing with damages. As everybody knows, we are in the 4th chapter, and we're making great progress. This is just the annoying part of going through this. Okay. Today's Mishnah is actually really practical. Again, it's around counseling and trying to kind of hold the complexities of the lived experience, which are often unpleasant. The acknowledgement from the Mishnah here, from Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, is that emotions are total. And we'll speak more about this, but this is really practical and good advice. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Oymar, he says, Al tirotze es chavercha b'shas ka'asoi. Do not try to appease or kind of talk down your friend during their hour of anger. Again, it's not coincidental, this play on words of b'shas. We saw b'sha achas in one, like in a moment of. So here also b'shas, literally meaning hour, but in a moment of anger. Va'al tinachamenu, and don't try to console. The root there is like tanchumen, like menachem, to hamakum yenachem eschem, may the Almighty console you. It's a language of consolation. The root there is actually noach, to rest, like to be calm. But it's the same thing as nachemu ami. It's the haftorah that we read after Tisha B'Av. It's one of the ones of consolation after the temple was destroyed. So b'shas shemesei mutal lefanav, that God forbid a person loses a relative before the burial. The Mishnah is saying you can't even have a conversation. The person hasn't begun the process of processing. And so to try to engage in that moment, it's the wound is open. There's no, you can't talk about like, a cosmetic, kind of surgery to deal with a scarring when there's no scar. It's just an open wound. Va'al tishol loy b'shas nidroi. So too, there used to be a time where people would make vows, often in moments of passion or anger or emotion. For example, the Gemara says the juxtapositioning of the Seita and the Nazir comes because when a person would see this woman who was suspected of adultery and was found innocent, meaning she's just suspected. The Sota is the woman who did not commit adultery. They should, but a person sees somebody who was guilty, should then become a Nazir as some sort of reaction. So a Nazir is a type of vow. So too, when a person is making a vow, you shouldn't ask if you really want to do this. The understanding being that if a person is being questioned about a commitment in a moment of passion, they're only going to double down. All right, we'll talk more about this in a minute. And also, if there's a person who's experiencing, life has ups and downs. In a moment of a down, especially if it's a public down, a person got fired, a person, is something happened that's a little embarrassing. Often space there and support from a distance is considered to be more successful as a way of showing care, because when a person really just wants to kind of hide, being seen can often be very painful. So what the Mishnah here is telling us is that it's not that there's a right way to be, but that the right way to be is to be sensitive. That here, we'll stop the share here. The Sfas Emes, who's one of the early Ger Rebbes, points out that the Hebrew word for life, chayim, is always in the plural because it's ups and downs. I know that we spoke this over, that the emotions within mainstream Jewish thought kind of correspond to the heart, where the intellect is considered to be more in the brain. The Sfas Emes also says this about the phylacteries, the tefillin, that we wear. The one in the head has 4 different compartments with 4 different segments of the Torah, where the one on the arm just has one compartment and one parchment. It's one big empty with one box. The Sfas Emes says that because emotions are total, and so therefore there's no compartmentalizing, and the intellect is able to kind of break things up. There are different answers to this as well. The Meshech Chochma, or Sameach, or Mir Simcha of Devinsk, dies about 100 years ago. He says that God's love for us, corresponding to the heart, is the same. God has love for humanity. A person has a pulse, God loves them. However, there are many different relationships that God can have with us. God can be in relationship with us and we're passive. God can be related, right? So that's the compartmentalization of the tefillin on the head. And the Talmud in Brachot says that God wears phylacteries. And the Gemara says, well, what's in his? And it talks about God's love for us. So part of what I think the Mishnah is recognizing here is that there's a way in which emotions expand. And if you contribute, like you offer some sort of like, it's like fuel for the fire, it's only going to enhance the experience of the moment. Part of, what I think a friend is supposed to do in these moments is to kind of listen, because when a person is able to talk about it, it lowers the emotional temperature. It's one of the big principles about language. I don't even know where I was 7 minutes ago. I was some sort of interfaith Zoom thing somewhere out west. I have no idea. All I know that it wasn't Eastern Standard Time because it messed up my schedule. So we were talking about LGBT things in an interfaith space. And it's one of the things that I've been focusing a lot on is just how limiting language is, that the experience of an individual is always more expansive than the language we have to describe it. The Maharal, Prague, 500 years ago, points this out, and I'm sure we've said this over, about Moses being kind of Aral Sifasayim, having some sort of impediment in speech. And the Maharal understands that if you experience God in some sort of, in the prophetic way that Moses did, you can't offer language to that. Like, how do you describe that? So it's and that's one of the reasons why at Passover, which is Pesach, it's the mouth that speaks. It gives a certain kind of expression to the depths of the complexity of the experience. And I know that we spoke about this Passover time, that everything on the Seder plate holds mutually exclusive symbolism, which on the simple level, it's either this or that. Either it's the bread, what is this? It's matzah, right? It's flour and water, that's the simple. Below the surface, right, it's both the bread of liberation and the bread of poverty, of enslavement, and those are not contradictions, right? But when you talk about it, what is this, right? It's this or that. That's one of the ways in which we are more complicated than God. So when we think about trying to be supportive to people, being able to listen, to allow them to get the stuff out, because then it's only horrific, it's only traumatic, I'm only sad. So there's a lot to be said here, but in terms of the sensitivity, I think part of the deeper message at this stage in Jewish history is a recognition that not every calamity, not every sad incident has a solution. Sometimes there's nothing to say. And I'm sure we've mentioned this. As I teach more in the day for CBST, I can never remember, did I say this morning? Was it like it's the same group, different group? You'll forgive me if you've heard this from me before. But and I think we spoke about this recently, that when Aaron's sons die, the verse says that Aaron was silent because it's unnatural that parents bury children. It's not the way, right? Even when it comes to us in relationship to animals, there's a biblical obligation to shoo a mother away from the eggs before a person takes the eggs, because of the sensitivity that within the natural order of the world, parents leave this world before children. So I think part of what the message of the Mishnah is that, like, when we look for explanations in the universe and why are things happening and how is there destruction, how is there an exile, and how is there oppression, and how is all of this, we think about it because we want to, give it the best chance of having insight to be able to make a better tomorrow. But in the moment of the thing, it's one of the reasons why these protests in the street, they're powerful, but they're also potentially really dangerous. Everybody's riled up, and everybody's like, it's so raw and it's so in the moment. And I was on a different call with ultra-Orthodox rabbis, and they were talking about the difference between protests in Israel and America. And so they were saying, in America, ultra-Orthodox Jews, we don't protest. I don't protest. This is not our country in that way. Longer conversation what that means. In Israel, the ultra-Orthodox protest all the time. It's like the national pastime, that and dumpster burning. Anyways, there's an interesting way. I think there's what to discuss on why there's a custom in one place to do something and something else. But there's, I think, something really positive about it, because we saw what happened in Borough Park in Williamsburg when there were protests over, burning masks. They had mask burning parties, and that was part of the protest. It never ends well. right? Because you don't have the articulate spokespeople of any community there saying in really nuanced and complex ways, this is complicated in the way in which we should approach it like this, right? You have a burn it all down mentality of we need a new beginning. So there's a sensitivity that as things are difficult, the response isn't always to take to the streets. The response isn't always to respond. Sometimes it's just about acknowledging this is really horrific. This is really traumatic. I cannot understand, what you're going through, but know that like I see you and I'm here for you. And like when you're ready, I am here to do whatever I can. So, anyways, want to open it up for conversation. Yes, please, Doug.
I would like this saying a little bit better if there was somewhere in it that it indicated that you should be there for the person, even if you're not speaking to them. It doesn't say that. It basically says avoid them.
Yeah.
And that's not comforting.
It's not comforting. I think you're right. Certainly the end of the Mishnah is kind of explicit, like try to avoid them, right? Like try not to see them. And I think part of the interpretation of between the lines is that if they don't want to be seen, don't try to say, no, let's talk. And I find this, in Corona now, people, everybody responds differently. For some people, there's this need of connection, like, hey, do you want to chapa shmooze? Do you want to, maybe we could find time to talk? And indeed, CVST, I think, has something like 85 connectors. And there's certain people that actually say, like, it's more laborious, it's more draining to have to be present for a half an hour with somebody to have a conversation. There's no right or wrong. It's just each person is different, and depending on the mood of the individual in the moment. I hear what you're saying, and I'm not pushing back. I would hope that the reader gets from this Mishnah a sensitivity that we want to do what's helpful. And you're right, it probably would have, I think in our times, saying it explicitly, like what is helpful is to convey the intentionality that if it is helpful, I am here, and that is not said, you're right. I don't know, I would like to think that maybe some people could intuit that, but it's really tricky, in thinking about allyship. It's also really tricky. What can be really supportive and validating and affirming to one can be offensive and traumatic to another. And we talk a lot about relationship building within different communities and no justice for us. Without us, we can't just inhabit the voice that's not our own. That's not how it works. But at the same time, certain communities don't want to be in dialogue. And, certainly insular communities. I was on a call with Linda Sor over the summer last year. I was in Israel as it happened. She wanted to put together this I don't know, it was an allyship march against anti-Semitism. And she had reached out to, and out Jews, I'll say this better, for people who are more out as being Jewish, whether that's wearing a Jewish star or wearing something that identifies them as Jewish, often are found in Orthodox communities, obviously not exclusively. And she had reached out to Orthodox leaders and nobody would return her call, in part because of the Israel piece and in part because of she's not Jewish, and in part of that she's Muslim. And I said to her, like, even though we say there's no, justice for us without us, there are exceptions to every rule. And I think most Jews would feel like if you could just solve anti-Semitism, that would be great. I don't need to be part of that conversation. And certainly within the Orthodox world, I don't want to be part of that conversation. Anti-Semitism doesn't exist because of me, although I will acknowledge sometimes we make it a lot easier for people to be critical, and we need to own that. So I think it's tricky, and I think you're 100% right that part of the struggle of the Mishnah is, when do you show up and when do you not? And I think hopefully what's being conveyed here is that it's person specific. It's the person you're trying to help, and these are broad categories. Meaning, I was just dealing with a call earlier that involved a relatively young kid, and I was speaking to the parent. The parent hopefully knows the child best. But sometimes children really can be coaxed out of some sort of tantrum. We can see, when I looked at the world, I think of things as examples, and there's somebody in particular who, right, with all the negativity is a great example of what does it look like for a person who never worked on themselves in terms of having temper tantrums as an adult, that we can learn from, and people who are in close proximity know how to, hopefully, to talk to somebody to talk them down. So that's all to say that it is really person specific, and these are principles. The principle is that if you're going to say something to somebody that's not going to make it better, don't say something. Yeah, Lori.
If I heard you right, you said sometimes you have to show up and sometimes not. But don't you think you always have to show up? It's just how you show up. Because if you show up and you're not showing up from your own ego point of view and you're trying to hear the other person, you can show up and not say anything and just be there for the person. It's really a lot harder to do that than to give your pearls of wisdom, and feel that you've helped your child or your friend. So I think showing up is always like essential wherever you are.
Yeah, so I agree, and maybe I should use better language. When we think about showing up, sometimes that means not being there. Meaning, sometimes someone will send an email saying something like, "Hey, I heard about this. Can we talk about it tomorrow? I want to be supportive." Maybe tomorrow's really inconvenient, right? Maybe I don't ever want to talk about it. Maybe I want to talk about it now with you. So I think part of that, like, what does it mean to be supportive and being present is conveying, right, that intentionality, that desire, that, I'm so sorry that you're going through this. I wish there was something that I could do. Know that I'm here for you if there's something that I can do. And for some people, like, and again, it is person specific. For some people, they're never going to take you up on it, right? For some people, the only way that it'll work is if you say, listen, I'm going to swing by tomorrow, and because for that person, that's the only way it's going to happen. So I think sometimes showing up means being at a distance, if that's what's helpful. And for some people, it's actually showing up when you're not, I don't want to say not invited, but if you know the person is the person that would so appreciate being taken care of in the morning, but has some in the moment, but has a kind of blockage that they're never the person who could ever ask for it. So then, like, that's part of being a good friend, is that sometimes you know the person also in an objective way. That often when people are emotional, when people are really going through something, then they're not eating, they're not sleeping, like they lose all sorts of kind of groundingness to it. And so part of that, the communal responsibility is to try to take care of people in the most basic ways. Yeah, Ben.
I read that last sentence a little differently. You would avoid the person an hour of disgrace because perhaps that person will interpret your appearance as A, gloating, which of course you don't want to do if you don't mean to, or B, lecturing them. They don't want to hear that either. So it's a time of figure out when the right time is to approach them and how to be the most supportive. But I wanted to ask you about something else, the word appease. So are you able to look at the Hebrew and just come up with synonyms without looking at the English and coming up with synonyms of appease? Because I don't think appease would be the right word.
Yeah. So tirotze, the root there is like rotze, to want, I think. So don't, yeah. Maybe will. Don't like will a person away from their anger, right? Like if a person could just visualize there's someone who's all riled up.
That's completely different. Thank you. I understand the difference now, and that's completely different.
Yeah.
So it's appeasing them in their anger. I'm angry that you haven't paid me yet. Okay, I'll pay you.
Right.
That's one thing, but you're saying something completely different, and now I understand it. Thank you.
No, and thank you for bringing the awareness. This word is a strange word, and every time, I'm so slow to remember that that's happened. So I would say that, like, for example, to interrupt somebody when they're on some sort of tirade, like they're venting because they need to get it out. So to plug up the vent in the middle of that kind of letting off steam, the mission is saying it's not helpful. They're not going to listen. They're not going to get it out. Maybe this is right. It's not good to be so angry, but they're also in a way that they're on autopilot. It's just like it's not helpful to try to interrupt. Let them get it out, and then like you can say, "Hey, I totally hear you," and you're like, "Yeah, it's super frustrating, but like, what should we do about it?" Or like, how can we make this better? Or will what we're doing now change it? So, but trying to have those nuanced conversations in the middle of the tirade is the mission is saying is never. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. Yeah, please, Sharon.
It's Sharon. They have that, I think it's Winnie the Pooh. You've seen it, I'm sure, that cartoon where he just shows up to be next to him, doesn't say a word, because oftentimes you're not supposed to say anything. You're supposed to just be there to listen. It's worse to be there begrudgingly and try to say something to people. But I always love that cartoon where he's there. He doesn't say a word. He puts his arm around him, and that's it. It's there.
Yeah, it's one of the more difficult parts of Corona now, that the nonverbal communication of just giving somebody a hug, a pat on the back, being able to say like, You don't have to carry this alone. You know, like I'm here for you. Or yeah, it's really hard. And again, there's something really limiting about language in general when it comes to the emotional piece. And there is something really comforting about kind of that nonverbal communication. Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, Joan. Yeah.
Okay, so about dealing with somebody when they're angry.
Yeah.
Two things. One is, I take the comment here to mean don't feed the anger, even though the angry person wants that. Right?
That's great. Yeah, meaning if somebody's telling you, "Hey, you did this," to say, "No, I didn't," you know, you're a bad person. It's not going to help.
Well, but yeah, right. Don't get into the fight with them. But also somebody's saying, "I'm really angry at this other person because blah blah blah." I mean, you know, person A can be furious at person B, and then another person can like get a lot of points with the angry one by joining in and saying, "Oh yeah, you're right to be angry at them," and it does not make the situation better. So I think it's partly a caution against that, because I think it can. I mean, I've seen plenty of times when it was really on the level of a sin, the way somebody's anger got stoked. The other thing is, Lori, if the person's angry, I mean, I know somebody who gets angry, and I learned really the hard way that sometimes what I need to do is give the person their space. You know, that to try to be there and make things better was just like, beyond my abilities anyway. And I don't think it's just about, my particular abilities. I think there are times when a person really wants to be left alone.
Yeah.
And either they don't want anybody around, or they don't want you around.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yes, it's all very true. A couple of quick comments, and then Saul. Anger in the Talmud's perspective is among the worst evils of the world. The Gemara Talmud compares it to idolatry. It says that there are three things that actually like remove a person from this world, because, right, a person, and again, there's anger, and there's like, you go to Dunkin' Donuts and they forget, your donut in the order. You can be angry. Like there's a threshold of like, this is super annoying, and that's right. But there's an anger where a person becomes no longer human, right? You can't even recognize the person anymore in that anger. And the Gemara talks about it in relationship to embarrassing somebody, right? It's like the blood drains from their face, like you're killing them. And here, when a person gets so angry, they're like so filled with blood, like the animalistic piece becomes what's dominant. The Gemara says something really interesting, that you can know a person, like the essence of who they are, through three things, and it's a bit of a pun or play on words in Hebrew. It's kasai, kisai, and kaisai. Through a person's kais, their cup, like what happens when they drink, like what there's certain, and again, there's drinking, but like who comes out there? There's kiso, their pocket. How do they spend money, right? Are they really stingy with like important things and like really lavish with unimportant? Like you can learn a lot about how a person prioritizes what they spend on. And kase, what happens when they get angry? So there's anger, which is a helpful anger, meaning that like a person's a teacher or a parent, a person does something that they shouldn't do. It's important to say like I'm not okay with this. Like this is really right, but it needs to be constructive. It needs to be the determining factor the Gemara says is the person in control? That moment of losing control, where meaning a person shouldn't really be angry, but a person can be perceived as being angry in order to give over a lesson. But it's a function of like, are you really in control or not? So when a person loses control, they're no longer human in that way. Yeah, Saul.
So I think what's missing from this Mishnah, of course, is be careful what you're saying, and other people are saying is be careful what you say, because on the one hand, the book of Job, when Job has the deaths, and his friends come to visit him, and they sit for however long they sit with him, and they don't say a word, and then when they speak, what they say is, you must have done something. It's your fault. You must have done something. And he goes crazy, because I didn't do anything. This is who I am. But and the one about the person who's angry, I'm thinking something that happened yesterday. So Cedric came back from the store and he came home and said that a customer came in and said to him, you know, I've had no sense of taste or smell for months. Right, Susan. He was like, how could they come in the store? And why do they tell me that? And I don't know what to say. I mean, she's wrong to tell, the customer is wrong to tell him because she's created this whole unease on his part and I can't make it better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah. I mean, what do you say, right? So, you know, whatever a person can do is to offer some comfort. But, you know, in that first kind of moment of expression of like, you won't believe this. This is like, this is right. So letting that come out is itself probably some level of comfort that somebody heard and saw. And also like we're living in times of such lies in the world in general, where everything is being questioned as like fake news and false this and false that. It's disorienting. Right? Like when a person, like the space between the expectation of a healthy person in any interaction and the way in which somebody else is presenting as if you're the one who's like from a different planet, we have to start questioning our own sanity, right? Because like there's a new norm that we're saying, hey, this isn't normal. That's not okay. Like in what universe, right? And like we think like maybe we're from a different universe. Like it can mess with a person. So even just a person saying, yes, I hear you. That is right, like beyond unacceptable. Is itself, I think, grounding in that, like, okay, so I'm not I have this all the time because I'm in my head so much, like, right, like as an objective person, I'll say to Wendy, right, this is a little bit strange, right, and her saying absolutely, sometimes you're off. This is not one of those examples. Like, is actually for me really reassuring. All right, friends, I have to hop off. We can continue. We will continue. Was there another hand that was up? Was there somebody else who wanted to say something? Okay, good. Fantastic. All right, friends, such a pleasure always. And tomorrow is Wednesday, so we'll see you here with the very next Mishnah. Stay safe and have a great day.